The boot hit me so hard I heard the crack before I felt the pain. 1 second I was just another black man on the sidewalk outside a shelter holding a beat-up cardboard sign that said, "Army Vet, anything helps." The next second I was face down on the concrete cheek, grinding against old gum and gravel, tasting blood while a cop laughed above me like he'd just kicked a trash bag instead of a person. And the wild part is, he had no idea the man he'd just called garbage was a captain from Internal Affairs with a badge tucked inside that filthy coat recording every word he said. Yeah, that happened. That wasn't where my story started, though. That was 3 weeks in after I'd already traded my pressed shirts and clean office for a cot at Harbor Heights Mission and a new name, Marcus Dean. Just another statistic on the street. Before all that, there was a conference room with humming fluorescent lights, 2 strong coffee, and a map of the city on the wall bleeding red pushpins around one neighborhood. 3 deaths in custody in 8 months, Chief Karen Doyle said, sliding a stack of files toward me, her jaw tight. Same officer on all 3, all ruled justified, none of them sit right. And I flipped those files open one by one and saw the same thing in every photograph. Bruises that didn't match the report's eyes that had been afraid long before they'd gone empty. Names nobody would put on a billboard. Men who died alone in holding cells after being picked up for things like loitering, public intoxication, trespassing behind grocery stores. Existing where they weren't wanted. Detective Tessa Cho leaned forward, tapping the map with her pen. Each red pin clustered around the shelter district, the food line, the cheap diner that let folks sit in the back if they nursed a coffee. All here, she said. Witness statements keep disappearing. Body cam footage conveniently fails. The only constant is Officer Brad Colson and his Lieutenant Stone magically losing paperwork. And then she said the name that kept coming up in complaint emails nobody upstairs had bothered to answer. Rachel Moore at the Safe Harbor Center. She's been filing reports on him for months. Says he's hunting the homeless, not just hassling them. Chief Doyle looked at me over those files like she'd already made up her mind. We tried surveillance. He cleans up his act when uniforms are nearby. What we need is someone he'll never see coming. Someone on the ground he thinks is powerless. And I knew before she said it where this was going. You want me to go in as one of them? I said, and she nodded. You're ex-Army. You've done deep cover before, and I trust you not to lose yourself in the gray when things get ugly. They handed me a new identity. Marcus Dean, 52, 2 tours, bad knee fired from a warehouse job, rent gone, family gone, and a stack of carefully aged documents to match Social Security card, VA card, even an old photo of younger me in uniform, and then they took my badge and my gun and my car keys and told me straight up, once you step into this, it's weeks, maybe months living it for real. We'll have eyes nearby. But if Colson makes you and decides to handle it the way he's handled other problems, he can kill you and write his own version. So be smart, Jordan. You nod in that room because you've got a job to do. But I'll tell you the truth. The first night I tried to sleep on a plastic-covered mattress in a room full of strangers who talked in their sleep and clutched their bags like life rafts. I stared at the ceiling and thought, what the hell am I doing? Then I walked out into the cold at 3 a.m. because it was quieter there. The street teaches you fast. You stop walking like a cop, stop making eye contact. You learn which church gives out hot meals on Thursdays, and which alley you can sit in without someone calling the cops. You learn how quickly people's eyes slide past you when you're dirty and tired and holding a sign, and you learn who still looks. Anyway, guys, like Pops, old man with a gray beard and a denim jacket 3 sizes too big, who flopped down next to me on the shelter steps one afternoon and said, "You're new. You still sit like you own something." Then laughed when I looked confused. "Give it a week. You'll hunch like the rest of us." I met Coulson on day 5 standing outside the mission with that cardboard sign and a hat pulled low, ribs already sore from sleeping on concrete morning air cold enough to sting my lungs. I saw his squad car roll onto the block that casual, slow patrol cops do when they're pretending they're just passing through. And everything in his body language said, this wasn't about safety checks. This was about sport. He parked at a shallow angle like he was marking territory. Stepped out, hand resting on his belt, scanning the sidewalk like he was picking which piece of trash to kick first. When his eyes landed on me, it felt like a spotlight. He walked straight over boots so shiny they reflected my face and said without even saying hello, "Didn't I tell you people not to sit here like we'd had some long-standing relationship and I kept my eyes low, played the script. Just resting a little, officer, I'll move." And that's when his boot came out of nowhere and slammed right up into my ribs, all air gone concrete, rushing up to meet my cheek, his laugh floating above me. Rest somewhere, no one has to look at you. On the outside, I was wheezing, scrambling, trying to look small, trying to look like the system had already beaten me on the inside. Every nerve I had as a cop was lit up with anger. My hand itched toward the badge hidden under my layers, and I had to silently repeat to myself, "Record, don't react," because that little device sewn into my coat lining was catching all of it. The words, the kicks, the way he called me it, more than him. You'd think that would have been enough for anybody to pull me off the street. But the thing about patterns is one ugly incident is a story. 10 in a row is a case. So I swallowed the pain, played my part, and kept going. 2 mornings later, I followed Coulson's patrol route to a side alley behind a greasy spoon called Marty's, tucked myself behind a dumpster that smelled worse than my shoes, and waited. And sure enough, he rolled up slow on this faded blue sedan where a woman was sleeping, with the seat leaned back, blankets piled up, coffee cup on the dash. Her name, I'd learn later, was Denise Carter, 61 years old, working all her life until a hospital bill wiped everything out. Now living in that car like it was a studio apartment with 4 wheels, and Coulson pulled in tight so she couldn't back out like he'd practiced that angle. He woke her up by banging on the window with his flashlight, demanded license and registration in that tone we all know, the one that already assumes you're guilty, and when she stammered that the address on her registration was her old apartment, that she hadn't had the money to update it, he latched onto that like a shark. "So you're admitting you're lying on state documents, that's a crime," he said, leaning in, watching her hands shake. Then he went further. "Here's the deal you give me. Everything valuable in this car, and I'll pretend I didn't see this. Otherwise, I can impound this heap and you can freeze on the sidewalk." And you could see in her eyes that he'd just threatened to take the only roof she had left. She kept saying, "I don't have anything, I pawned my ring. I've got medicine, that's it." And he looked offended, like she'd insulted him by being poor. He ripped her purse out of her hands so fast the strap snapped, dumped it onto the asphalt. Money receipts, pill bottles, scattering a photo, sliding out of her wallet. He picked that up, looked at it. 2 kids with missing front teeth grinning at the camera. "These yours?" he asked, and when she said, "My grandbabies," he smirked and tore the photo in half right in front of her, let the pieces fall and said, "Would be a shame if something happened to them because you can't follow simple instructions." When he kicked her insulin bottle so it skittered under another car and crushed a few of the loose pills under his perfect boot, I felt my fists clench so hard my nails dug into my palms I had to press my shoulder into the cold metal behind me just to stay put. My whole body screaming to step in, badge out, game over. But that would have saved Denise for a minute and condemned every other person on that map to another year of this. So I let the recorder do its job while my heart just broke. I waited until he drove off, siren off like nothing had happened, then crawled out, grabbed the torn photo pieces, slid them into my pocket, and promised myself I'd hand them back to her one day as something more than a symbol. The breaking point for me wasn't the first kick or Denise's tears, it was the day he decided to bring his show to the food line. You know, the one place people had left that still felt like community. We were all lined up outside Salvation Hall, shuffling forward for sandwiches and clean socks, cracking jokes to stay warm. Rachel and her volunteers working the folding tables like they were hosting a barbecue, not a survival operation. And for a second I forgot I was undercover and just enjoyed being treated like a person. Then Coulson's cruiser slid into the curb, hard engine revving loud like a challenge. He stepped out and raised his voice so the whole block could hear, "Well, look at this, a whole convention of freeloaders." And you felt it ripple through the line, conversations dying, shoulders tensing, people instinctively taking half a step back. Rachel stepped out from behind the table with this tired kind of courage, like she'd done this dance too many times. "Officer, we have a permit on file, everything's on record, we're just distributing food." And he smiled in that slow way that says he's about to break something you care about. "Got a call about drugs and stolen merch," he said, obviously lying. "So here's how this is going to go. Everyone empties their pockets. Anybody walks away, I put them in cuffs." And folks started looking around like trapped animals, because that's exactly how the system had trained them to feel. He pointed right at me again. "You, Marcus, front and center," he said, and I had to pretend not to know that my file was sitting on a desk back at IA with his name highlighted all over it. I slouched forward, emptied my pockets onto the sidewalk, letting my notebook, a couple dollars and some loose change fall, and watched him flip through my scribbled job leads, tear a few pages out, crumple them, drop them at my feet like trash. "Stop bothering hardworking people with this," he said. "Nobody's hiring a bum." Then he started patting down my coat fingers, closing on the little pill bottle we'd planted as cover. Just regular store brand painkillers. He held it up like he'd found a kilo unmarked pills. That's possession, he said loudly, turning to the line as if to show off. And Rachel, bless her, stepped in again. Those are clearly over the counter, you can see the stamp on them. And he wheeled on her eyes. Cold. Lady, you want to go to jail for obstruction, keep talking. Then he kicked me again, this time while I was on my knees, grabbing the pages he'd ripped, knocked me flat for everyone to see. Stay down where you belong, he said. And I saw in Rachel's face that line, that thin thread of patience snap. You can't just assault people because they're homeless, she shouted, and he grabbed her arm hard enough to bruise, shoved her backward into the table so sandwiches flew into the gutter, stomped on a bag of clothes someone had donated with love, and for a second the whole scene just froze like a picture. Food in the street, coffee dripping off the curb, me on the concrete, Rachel bracing herself on the table, and this uniformed man in the middle smiling. That's when a second squad car rolled up, Miguel Alvarez at the wheel. Younger guy I'd seen around the station. Reputation for doing the job straight. He took one look at the mess and you could see his brain filing it under, something's off. He walked over, not barking, just steady. What's the situation, Brad? He asked, and Coulson snapped back into his good cop for the camera's voice so fast it was almost comical. Non-compliant subject social worker interfering routine. And Alvarez didn't argue, just moved past him to me, crouched a little and asked quietly, Sir, are you hurt? You need medical. Sir, after weeks of it and garbage and this one, that word almost undid me more than the kicks. I told him I'd just fallen. We both knew it was a lie, but in that moment he did something important. He told me I had the right to file a complaint, and then in front of Coulson he said he'd be filing a report himself, documenting that force had been used and that Rachel had raised concerns. You could practically hear the gears grinding in Coulson's head as control started slipping. That was the first twist the moment another cop chose to see us, and it changed everything for better and for worse. Because after that day, things on the street got sharper. Rumors floated back to the shelter that Coulson had been spending his off-duty time in the precinct's back office running searches. He wasn't supposed to run, asking questions about the new guy who showed up out of nowhere with too clean a vocabulary. Rachel pulled me aside one evening in the common room, her voice low but urgent. Marcus, I don't know who you really are, but he's looking you up and he's not subtle about it. And my stomach dropped, because if his suspicion ever connected with the right database, all that careful fake paper would start to unravel. I stepped out the back door, pressed my thumb to the emergency beacon on my belt to tell Tessa it was time to pull me out. Meet point 2 blocks over, simple, controlled. That was the plan, but predators don't wait for your plan. By the time I stepped onto the sidewalk out front, Brad Coulson was already there, leaning against his cruiser under that flickering streetlight, arms folded like a man who'd been rehearsing the scene, his hand resting just inches from his holstered gun. Evening, Marcus, he said, voice calm in a way that made every instinct I had itch. Funny thing, I ran your social today, and according to the state of New Jersey, Marcus Dean died in a car crash 3 years ago. Then he pulled out a folded paper and held it up between 2 fingers. There was my real face staring back at me from the top corner, IA photo, name and rank right underneath. So tell me, Captain Miles from Internal Affairs, you slumming it for fun, or is this some kind of entrapment I should be worried about? Behind him, the shelter door creaked open, and I caught a glimpse of Rachel and Pops in the doorway, eyes wide, putting pieces together way faster than I wanted them to. And that was the second twist. The moment the lie I'd been living crashed into the truth I couldn't hide anymore. I straightened up without even meaning to, years of command posture sneaking back into my spine. It's true, I said, my voice finally my own. I'm Captain Jordan Miles, Internal Affairs, and Brad, you're under arrest right now for assault, extortion, civil rights violations. We've got you on tape, hurting people you swore to protect. And for a heartbeat, he just stared at me. Then his face changed, something hard and ugly settling in, and his hand went for his gun. No, see what we actually have, he said as he raised that weapon and leveled it at my chest, is a tragic story about a brave undercover officer who got himself caught by the animals he was trying to help. He lunged at me. I feared for my life. You know how the rest goes. And you'd be surprised how many juries nod at that. You know what I mean. That might have been the end of my story right there, if not for the sound of engines coming in hot, Tessa's unmarked sedan and Alvarez's cruiser screaming around the corner doors flying open. Guns drawn. Coulson, drop the weapon, Tessa shouted, her voice whiplash sharp. And now we had this insane tableau. Me in the middle with blood still dried on my collar from earlier that week, Coulson with his service weapon pointed at my chest, Rachel and Pops in the doorway. IA and patrol officers fanned out, everyone one twitch away from disaster. What came out of Coulson's mouth next ruined whatever was left of his reputation, more than any file I could have brought. He started ranting about leeches and real citizens, his voice cracking as he tried to convince himself as much as anyone else that he was the hero here. You spend 3 weeks playing dress-up captain, and now you think you understand what it's like down here. He spit. These people don't want help. They want a free ride. They're dragging this neighborhood down. I've been doing what needed to be done. And Rachel, shaky but stubborn in that doorway, called back. The only person I've ever seen terrorize this block in a badge is you. When he swung the gun toward her finger, tightening, something in me moved before my brain did. I stepped between them just as he fired, pain exploding through my shoulder, like somebody had jammed a hot crowbar through the joint. The world tilting, concrete rushing up again, Rachel dropping with me as I tackled her out of the line of fire, and in the same breath I heard the scrape of Tessa's boots on asphalt as she launched herself at him, slamming him into his own cruiser, the gun clattering away across the street. Sirens got louder. Radios crackled. Alvarez was shouting for medics and backup people were yelling from windows, and all I could focus on was Rachel's face hovering above mine, tears mixing with the blood on my jacket as she pressed both hands into the wound to slow it down. "Why would you do that?" she asked, half angry, half shocked, and the only thing that came out of my mouth was, "Because somebody should have done it sooner." 6 months later, I sat in a federal courtroom instead of on a curb. Same shoulder aching whenever the AC kicked on suit a little tighter from time off, telling 12 strangers and a judge how a cop named Brad Coulson turned a badge into a hunting license until someone finally said no. They played the recordings we'd pulled off my hidden gear, the crack of boots, the way he ripped Denise's photo, his voice when he called us things instead of people. They heard Pops talk about hiding in doorways when he saw that patrol car. They listened to Rachel describe him kicking food into the gutter like it was trash. And then they listened to Alvarez, an officer with nothing to gain, say under oath that he'd seen enough to know something was wrong long before IA went in. Coulson's lawyer tried to spin it all as stress, as aggressive policing, as me pushing him into corners. But then the prosecutor asked him straight up, "Do you believe homeless people deserve the same constitutional protections as everyone else?" And he couldn't help himself. He rolled his eyes and said, "They're not real citizens in any meaningful way. They're parasites." You could feel the whole room tighten. Even a couple of jurors shifted in their seats like they'd been slapped, and in that moment he convicted himself more than any of us ever could. They gave him 35 years, no parole. His lieutenant got 7 for burying complaints. The department rolled out new policies, body cams, an independent review board, all the stuff you hear in press conferences, and yeah, some of it stuck. Some of it was for show, and some of it changed the way we do this job. For real, Rachel's Center got a grant, put my name on a small plaque in the lobby that still makes me uncomfortable when I visit Alvarez, moved into a community policing unit where he actually walks the block instead of just driving through, and Pops, last time I saw him, was leading a kind of informal support circle at the shelter for folks who'd been roughed up by cops and never told anyone, because now for the first time in a long time they believe someone might actually listen. So yeah, in the end, the racist cop who kicked the homeless guy and didn't know he was internal affairs went to prison. The headlines called it justice. Body cams lit up, policies changed. But I'll be honest with you, sometimes when I drive past Harbor Heights and see a new face huddled on those steps, I wonder how many other Coulsons are still out there in different uniforms, different cities doing the same thing where nobody's watching, and whether 35 years for one man is enough to balance what he did to people who never even got an obituary. That's where I want to bring it back to you. If you made it this far with me, I appreciate you more than, so tell me in the comments, do you think that sentence was enough? Do you think the system we have can really police itself? Have you ever seen someone in power talk to another human being like they were less than human just because of how they looked or where they slept, and did anybody step in or did everyone look away? Hit, like if you think a badge should never be a free pass to hurt the people who need protection the most. Hit subscribe if you want more real stories that don't skip the ugly parts. And most importantly, share your own stories down there, because the only way we keep guys like Coulson from hiding in the dark is by turning the lights on together.